Hello everybody, welcome back to another Age of Sigmar Warcry video. We've currently finished Season 1 of Warcry. All 4 big boxes have been released. We've got our roadmap going into the rest of the year and into the spring of next year, so that's all very interesting. And on top of that, very soon, we're going to have a starter set coming out, the Crypt of Blood. So I thought I would take this time to kind of take stock of where we are in the game, where we're going to be going, and what I think Games Workshop could be doing in order to increase the amount of support that they give for the game and really give the players the tools that they need to give them confidence that Warcry is something that is on Games Workshop's agenda and that they're going to be pushing going into the future. So, talking a little bit about where we are now with the game, like I said, Season 1 is done. The 4 big boxes are out, and we're kind of in between product at the moment. We're waiting on Crypt of Blood, which is going to come out very soon. I'm going to be doing a full video of Crypt of Blood when it's released. But in short, it's going to be Warcry's new evergreen starter set. So the idea is you can walk into a store, and if you want to start playing Warcry more on a very small level, more of kind of like a board game style game, you can go, you can pick up Crypt of Blood. It's got everything you need to play. It's got rulebooks, it's got a couple of repackaged Underworlds factions, and it's basically everything you need to get a feel for the game and how it runs at that level. And it's a very good starting point for you to say, yes, Warcry is something that I want to get into. Warcry is something that I want to play, and then after that you can jump in with the various Age of Sigmar factions or one of the bespoke factions if that takes your fancy. Going back to Warhammer Fest, they did say that Crypt of Blood would be in the £60 to £70 range. I was hoping that Crypt of Blood would be more like £40. That would make it a very attractive prospect for new players. But you know, £60 for one of Games Workshop's really small starter sets is comparable to the 40k ones. It's comparable to the Age of Sigmar ones. So I think that's okay. In terms of their ongoing support, we've got the new warbands that are going to be coming out going through to the end of the year and going into spring of next year. In the latest White Dwarf 490, they've talked about the support that they're going to be giving to their skirmish games in general, so things like Warcry, Warhammer Underworld, Kill Team. They said they're going to be giving rotating support for those skirmish games. Now, the jury is still out as to what exactly that means. Does that mean that each month they'll deal with a different game? Or does that mean that each month they'll have new stuff for each game? We just don't know. It starts with Warcry. There's some optional match play rules in there. If you want to check those out, I think they're pretty interesting. I've done a video on that, and I will put the link down in the description below, or maybe up here, or wherever it ends up. But yeah, that's what they're going to be doing going forward in terms of actual official White Dwarf support, and what we're going to be looking at in the near future in terms of starter sets and the different kinds of warbands that are going to be released. Now, going back to Warhammer Fest very quickly, not everyone managed to sit in on the Q&A panel that they had. So this is a transcript courtesy of the guys over at Goonhammer. Now, I talked about this quite a bit in my actual Warhammer Fest coverage, but I think it gives some very interesting insight into where Warcry as a game is going to be going in the near future, and the kind of reasonings that Games Workshop have in their thought processes in terms of what exactly they're going to be releasing. So I'm not going to go over it all. The first point is that players asked if there's going to be a new Tome of Champions with updates for Underworld's models. Games Workshop said effectively that there wasn't anything planned, but it was something that they take away and they maybe think about possibly as an online release or maybe in a separate book. Questions were also asked about more White Dwarf updates, and again, very non-committal from the guys over on the panel. So possibly is an answer. Given that Warcry is going to be getting this rotating support out of White Dwarf, it's very possible that some of that support will be updates to some of the Underworld's warbands. So yeah, that'll be interesting on that point. I think it's fairly safe to say that Old World will not be coming to Warcry, so sad for you guys if you wanted to run your Bretonnians or your Tomb Kings. I don't think that's going to happen. It's a completely separate team, and it doesn't look like there was any appetite in Games Workshop to port those armies over into actual functional warbands. But in terms of Age of Sigmar and Warcry factions themselves, Games Workshop are very aware that the players basically want any new model that comes out in Age of Sigmar or in Underworlds almost instantly. But as we're going to see later, I think they've kind of dropped the ball a little bit in terms of the release of those models and the rules for those models. So I don't know if that's something that's on their long-term roadmap for Warcry. I think it's very possibly tied to the sales of the boxes. How well they do really determines what resource they're going to make available to the game. They did say that they didn't really know just how popular Warcry was. Now, one of the reasons for this is, of course, because you can use any Age of Sigmar and any Warhammer Underworlds model in Warcry. So if you pick up a warband for one of those other factions, it doesn't directly translate into Warcry sales. So Games Workshop themselves don't really have any massive visibility on how Warcry is doing as a game. But I do think that we've had some pretty high profile events recently. We've had the stuff happen at Warhammer Fest. We've got Nova, we've got things like Adepticon, all promising to be very large events. So maybe that's something that the events team and the community teams will keep a notice on, and something that they'll try to push for in the future. So going forward into what I would like to see, and what I think Games Workshop needs to do in order to keep the engagement of the community and to prove that Warcry is an actual game that they take seriously and want to push forward, and to show the community, yes, this is something that we're going to continue to support. This is something that is on our agenda. Don't worry about it. Because the last thing I want is for Warcry to do an Aeronautica, essentially. Aeronautica had a bunch of releases, but they only really received one FAQ in the entire life cycle of the game. There was definitely no points updates or anything like that. So you had these weirdly skewed lists that you can bring that would always effectively never change, and something that you could always do. I think personally that that's unhealthy for a game. It shows that there isn't any engagement from Games Workshop. So that's why I think at the very least, what they should be looking to do is to release an FAQ or an errata update. The last update that we had was in January 2023. So we are over 6 months now from the last update. I think twice a year is a decent schedule for a game like Warcry. I think we are overdue for some more points adjustments. Overall, we can see that in terms of the rules itself, the rules for Warcry are fine. I think there seem to be very little gray areas that come up. And I think that's really something that the game has going for it. You don't get 100 different questions every single game, and you can really just concentrate on playing the game itself and enjoying your matches. But the fighters themselves, what have we seen? We've seen that cheap movement-free chaff units, so things that are 55 points, 65 points, are definitely too cheap. They are far too impactful on the table for the force that they can bring. And because of that, you see mid-range fighters, so things that are 120 points, 130 points, and above, essentially, are a bit too expensive. So that really skews list building on the different formats that we have. We can also see that a lot of emphasis has been placed on the movement characteristic in terms of the points that you're paying. That essentially means that most cavalry just aren't that good. You have to be extremely fighty, extremely heavy cavalry in order to see any use, something like the Vanguard. But like cavalry, they pay a ton of points for that movement, but they don't really get to use it in the game. So overall, I think those kinds of fighters could really do with a points adjustment. There are a lot of fighters in Warcry, so I'm not suggesting that Games Workshop go through and amend the points cost of every single fighter. Rather, bringing the points costs up of the outlying fighters on the bottom end, so things like skeletons, maybe Graveguard, Caradron Overlord, infantry, that kind of thing, and bringing the points cost down kind of in the top to middle end. On top of this, I think that Bladeborn that we see of Tome of Champions 2021, they need updating in points. They are still on the last algorithm that they used, and that means that most Bladeborn are borderline unusable, just because they're too expensive. But some Bladeborn, so especially the Movement 5, Movement 6 Bladeborn, we're talking about things like the Starblood Stalkers, for example, Skace Wild Hunts, they are effectively too cheap because they're not paying for the movement like everything else is. So I think an overall balance there and an overall adjustment is really what the game needs in order to bring those power levels more in line when we're talking about the competitive side of things. And similarly, if those fighters are brought in line for competitive play, they'll be brought in line for narrative play also, because you won't have players who really just like to play a lot of skeletons, for example, totally dominating in certain matchups. The second thing I think that Games Workshop should be looking to do is updating the Warcry warbands for the latest Age of Sigmar releases. Now, since the game was released, there have effectively been a lot of updates for Age of Sigmar, and one of the most common questions that people ask is, how can I use my Ogroid Therodons? Or can I use my Raptidons, for example, in my warband? And the answer is basically always no, because they don't have any rules. Now, You can proxy things like the Theridons and the Agrodons and that kind of thing, but it's really not the same thing. And if you have Age of Sigmar players and you want to capture them and bring them into Warcry in terms of using their current miniatures and the armies that they have, then you really need all of the miniatures that you produce to be in the game. Otherwise, one of the main selling points of the game, i.e. the low point of entry, really isn't a selling point at all because you just have to go out and buy more models. Since the beginning of Warcry, we're talking about just over a year ago now, we've had the Slaves to Darkness update, of course, putting in the Theridons. We've had a number of big boxes come out with new characters. We're talking about things like the Lord of Hubris, the Realm Gore Ritualists, things like that. You could even go so far as to say the Lady of Vines. Of course, we've had the recent Seraphon update. They've got a number of new units. So here we've got the Agrodon Riders, you've got the Skink Riders, the Raptidons. There are 2 or 3 new kinds of Croxigor now. So all of these models can really find a place in Warcry if Games Workshop put in a little bit of time to update the rosters themselves. And of course, we've got the Cities of Sigmar range refresh coming. We're going to have all the new units from those. They've also said that a number of the older elf units are basically leaving. They're not going to be sold anymore. They're not going to be in the book anymore. So my thoughts are to go with Games Workshop's policy of not supporting models that they do not produce. I really do think that Cities of Sigmar could do with a new Warband roster refresh, just to take everything into account and to bring everything up to date so that it shows that, yeah, we are keeping up with Age of Sigmar itself, and here are the rules and here are the models for them. One of the other things that I do want to mention is that whenever a new Warcry warband is released or a new Warhammer Underworlds warband is released, Age of Sigmar gets those rules almost instantly. They go up online, you can download them, and they're ready to go. I never really saw the reason why Games Workshop didn't just do this for Warcry also. It doesn't take a whole lot more resource in order to do that. Some people argue that Warcry and Age of Sigmar and all the Games Workshop games themselves aren't even tested very deeply. So I think it's definitely something that Games Workshop could do very easily, and it would be a very good quality of life improvement for the fans, I think, for the fans of the game to, again, show that they're appreciated and to show that they do have a supported game. Linked to this, I want to talk about Bladeborn. Games Workshop started releasing the new Bladeborn rules in White Dwarf, and they released a bunch of them, but then they stopped. For some reason. It's been several months. We've got 4 of the Weird Hallow Bladeborn warbands that just haven't had any rules. I'm specifically waiting here for the Headsman's Curse because I love me some Nighthorn. And then you have a bunch of warbands that never made it into the 2021 Tome of Champions because they just weren't released yet, along with a number of older warbands that may have just been able to be missed. I'm not saying that Games Workshop should have rules for every single Bladeborn faction that they've ever released, especially ones that are now out of print. But I do think, at least, that for current and up-to-date Underworlds warbands, Games Workshop should be releasing those rules into Warcry so that it gives Underworlds players more of an incentive to actually play Warcry. I mean, that's the whole point. That's what they're doing with the new starter set. They're releasing 2 Underworlds warbands with that. We saw that in the Warhammer Fest coverage. They're very much aware that as soon as a new Age of Sigmar or Age of Sigmar World model is released, the players want them. So it's something that they could do, I feel, very easily and very quickly, and it would get you a lot of kudos points from the community. Finally, this is something that I kind of took from Warhammer 40k. What they've released is a tournament companion, and I found that really interesting because in that companion it essentially has all of the official missions that you could play if you wanted to play in a tournament. And these are supposed to be their most balanced missions that they produce. It also gives terrain layouts, how you should be setting up your boards. It gives you how to rank players and how to run your event. It's all standardized. And it's something that if Games Workshop are running their own events, it's something that they can use. And it's a cut and paste template. And it's something that's actively maintained and updated by the rules team and by their event teams. For Warcry, we did get something similar to this almost. There was a Nullwood Rumble pack that was released. I think it was a very good initiative. It was initially released by the Warhammer World Events team and then uploaded onto Warhammer Community for everyone to be able to use. The plan actually was to have a second season of the Rumble pack because the events team really noticed that the first version of the tournament pack, it really promoted promoted certain styles of building your warbands. It was either go big or go home. It was a lot of big objective missions, so that essentially pushed all elite warbands to the side, and it meant that if you don't run a horde warband, you're basically not going to win an event. They recognized this, and they said they were going to do a second season of it with less emphasis on objective grabbing, a little bit more killing in there, really mix up the missions themselves based on the information that they had off of all of the events that they ran. But essentially, due to poor attendance over at Warhammer World, those evening events that they were running are effectively cancelled, as far as I know. And I understand why eventually the turnout was so low that they had to can them. But I do think that there is a lot of merit in producing an official tournament pack from Games Workshop that says, if you want to play match play, this is how we recommend to play it. And I think that it could be really good, and it could include a lot of the things that we've been talking about for the Warhammer 40k pack. So things like terrain layouts, how much terrain they recommend that you should use. Match play specific rules, so things like Bladeborn legality, the new divine blessings out of White Dwarf, that's optional, but if it was in the tournament companion, then maybe it would encourage other tournament organizers to take on those rules and to run them in their events. I do think that something like this would be beneficial to the community. Of course, I would want this to go hand in hand with Games Workshop actually running more big events. The biggest event that they ran themselves was, of course, at Warhammer Fest. We had 55 players turn up at that. I really do want to see more of the big Nova, Adepticon, convention-style events. UK Games Expo, that kind of thing, run by Games Workshop, using their own setup, using their own terrain, and everything that Games Workshop is really known for, being able to put on good events of their own. What that shows to the community is, yes, we understand that you want to play in events, so we're going to run them for you, and we're going to try and make them the best events that we possibly can. Right, so that is it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching. I really do think that if Games Workshop takes a little bit of time and carries out some of these suggestions I'm putting forward, along with the new warbands that they're going to be releasing going through to the end of the year, I think that we will have a very good year of Warcry ahead of us, and hopefully several more going forward. I think Games Workshop has proved that they don't need to release the big terrain box with a couple of warbands in it in order for Warcry as a game to be successful. And I like the fact that that's something that they have taken on board, and that they're just going to be releasing warbands from now on. But yeah, I think there's more to do from their rules teams and from their events teams for the game. I know that some members of the community don't like things to move too quickly, but on the other hand, you want things to actually move themselves. Otherwise, yeah, we will have an Aeronautica situation where the game kind of languishes out for several years, and eventually it's just cut for something else. That's something that I want to avoid, and I want to try and keep interest in Warcry going, and really make sure that the players themselves have the tools and the encouragement from Games Workshop to play this game, and yeah, to have a lot of fun with it. But that's it. Like I said, that's it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know. Let me know what you thought about my suggestions to Games Workshop. Let me know if you're happy with the state of Warcry, how it's going, where we're going. Anything else you think the Games Workshop could be doing for you, for your games? Or maybe you're happy with how things are at the moment. And yeah, you just want to share that with everybody else. But that's it. That's it from me for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.